And so depending on what year you are, some of you may be at your very first year of college or your second year of college and just starting to think, well, maybe this is something that I want to do. And that's actually in some ways an ideal way and an ideal time to begin exploring your interests. This is a great time to start building your skills, get involved in research, start doing some summer programs. So even if you don't have a lot of research at your university, you can come to a place like Michigan over the summer. There's a research program called the Summer Research Opportunities Program. You can come here and do research in a summer lab. You can also, even if you're at Michigan, go do it elsewhere. Learn how things are done someplace else, start that networking. By your junior year, if you have already done some research and started building your skills, then you might start settling in on a research area. So maybe you started off like I did in a lab that, was doing some visual perception research and some aging, and you realize, well, the visual perception part, maybe that's not what's floating my boat so much, but I really liked studying the aging and the Alzheimer's aspect. So I kind of started moving my research direction more in that aspect. If you've been in the lab for a while, then this can be a good time to start talking to your mentors about doing a more independent research project. So when you first start, you're probably going to start working under a graduate student or under a postdoc. And ideally, if you're building your skills and you're kind of learning how the experiments get done, then you might start moving into a role where it's like, hey, now I have an idea. I want to take a look at this, and how does this fit into the lab? And maybe I can do maybe I can do an independent study or a senior and honors thesis. And senior year, if you are going to go to graduate school straight out of undergrad, is going to be a very busy one because you might be doing your honors thesis and running your independent research project and doing all of the very many wonderful things that are involved in applying for graduate school that we'll go through today. So just to kind of take a look at your big timeline. Yeah. That being said, if you are, so if you're feeling like, oh, wait, I'm not a freshman or sophomore anymore, and I'm just realizing that I wanted to do this and it's my junior year or my senior year, don't panic. It's not too late. What you may want to do at that point is take a little bit of extra time to pick up the research position by doing what's called a post-bac position. So that's a position where after you get your undergraduate degree, you work in a lab as a full-time research assistant for 1 or 2 years. And this is becoming a really, really common in some areas. In particular, people in clinical science, because it is so very, very competitive. Most of the high-ranked programs, they're really going to be looking for students who have had some of that post-bac experience. And honestly, in my experience as a faculty member, I have gotten more and more to like the graduate students who come in, not necessarily straight out of undergraduate. By the time that people come in their mid-20s or even afterwards, they just have had more life experience. And they also have a better idea. They seem to be more focused on what they want to do. They've really made that commitment and they've had more time to build their skills. So, right now, my second year graduate student is 40. And he's come back into academia after having a whole nother career, and he's doing great. So even if you're feeling behind as we go through this, I would say you're not behind, you just might take a slightly different path. So one way to think about, is this the year in which I should apply? I always say, the first thing that you should do is start thinking really hard about, is there a research area or research question that you really feel passionate about? And I often tell people, when you're looking at labs, you should have the idea of like, I could be up at 2 in the morning and analyzing data from this and like being really excited to find out what I'm going to discover. Because I think Yvette will also tell you that at some point in your graduate career, you are going to be up at 2 a.m. analyzing data. And so you might as well be excited about it. So in some ways, that should be your first criteria. But let's say you're there, you're like, yes, this is definitely what I want to do. I want to research schizophrenia and like I'm very passionate about this. One way to start thinking about it is if you've taken the GREs, if you have a good GRE score, then that, is a sort of a first sign. The other thing though is like the GRE is probably less necessary at this point. And so in some ways, I would almost say a pre-step here is to take a look at some of the programs that you're interested in and ask, do they need the GRE? So if you did not get a higher GRE and you did take it and your programs need it, retake the test, reapply. And you're probably going to increase your chances of admissions by waiting because you'll have another year of grades, maybe some awards. You're also going to just have more experience and life skills. So, in that meantime, you might also consider doing a full-time research job or doing a master's program to boost your credentials and skills. So again, if you're here at Michigan and you've done one research project, you can potentially do what's called our accelerated master's program, where you do one more year, you take graduate courses, so it's sort of like a way of just dipping your toe into doing graduate school while still continuing on in your first lab. You can also just, have the full-time research job and take on doing those more independent projects. And that way, and the nice thing about doing it that way is you get paid instead of paying for it. Likewise, a good one is a high GPA. And again, if you had a rough first or second year and then you need a little bit of time to sort of improve your grades or improve your trajectory, that might be a place where, taking some extra classes and showing that you can do the classes at the graduate level is a good idea. Or if you're just somebody who you're like, I do really well in the lab and I don't do so well in the classroom, that's fine. Classes in graduate school are really a pretty minimal aspect of it. So if you're able to demonstrate that you have the research skills and the writing skills, you probably can be fine. You're just going to have to do a little bit more to prove your credentials. The research experience is probably the most critical aspect, and this would be where I would say, sort of put as much of your effort into it as you can. And so again, if you're not there, go and spend that extra time doing the post-bac or doing a master's program, build some of those skills and experience. Again, you should have an idea at least of what you want to study. And it can be a somewhat broad idea, like you don't necessarily just want to have one experiment in mind or one super restricted line of research, but have an idea. So, when I was coming out, I knew I wanted to do something in attention and memory. I knew I was less interested in language, and I knew it wanted to involve like some aspects of aging. So I was like a pretty wide swath of people, and it helped me narrow down the people that I wanted to look at and who I wanted to apply to, but it still left me plenty. Again, if you're not sure and you don't have something that you're passionate about that's going to keep you interesting, don't go to graduate school just to go to graduate school. Don't go to graduate school just to get the 3 letters PhD. It really is a labor of love, and so you want to make sure that you have that love going into it. And life experience is a good one too. As I said, I actually now as a faculty member almost prefer taking graduate students who've had a couple of years out, because the switch from undergraduate to graduate school is actually a pretty big one. You're even more independent than you were as an undergraduate. You really are sort of having your life. And then also, it is in some ways sort of a monk-like existence because you are pretty dedicated to what you're doing. You are pretty dedicated to your lab. So if you want to go and like spend a year backpacking around Europe, or you want to go spend it in the Peace Corps, like probably the time in between undergraduate and graduate school is a really good time to do that. So again, this might be your last good chance for quite a while to do something really interesting that you always wanted to try out. I won't say it's going to be your last chance ever in life, because one of the nice things about being a faculty member is you do get to sort of make your own career in a lot of different ways and make your own job description. But it's going to be a while, especially if you're going to stay through. All right, I see there's some questions in the chat about, it looks like you're catching most of those so far. Great. So, if you're feeling good about your status on all of those, I would also say, talk to your mentors. If you have a research lab, I talk to them, talk to your professors, talk to the graduate students who are helping to lead your courses, ask them to look over things with you. And if you're feeling good about all that, then go ahead and start applying. Again, if you are before your senior year, now is still the great time to start preparing by getting involved in the research lab, starting to consider what faculty and programs interest you. In some ways, you almost want to start the search of like trying to isolate the principal investigators and the faculty that you want to work with almost a year ahead of time. Again, if you are started late, it's okay. You're just going to have to work a little bit more intensely at this part. And so again, this is another good time for you to look at our fall seminar series, because we will sort of take a look at different kinds of careers and different kinds of research that you could be doing. So again, don't worry if you haven't done that preparation either. If you haven't had a chance to get into a research lab yet and you're struggling to do so, again, do check it out. Do check out our session on October 22nd, where we're really going to dive into that in more detail. Let's see. So the first thing that you're going to want to do, again, ideally is going to be in the summer, at least beforehand, research your graduate schools and advisors, and also the deadlines. And I would say, especially this year, several programs, including the one here at Michigan, have actually moved their deadlines earlier. So don't just go by what your older classmates have told you or what your professors and so on have told you about the deadlines. Look them up and make sure that you know. If you're going to be taking the GRE, study for and take it. Again, ideally, you'll have done that if you need to actually have the GRE. But if you haven't, I probably would say you might want to, if your programs need the GRE and you haven't had a chance to study for it, I might sit it out this time and wait until next year. But if you want to give it a try, you certainly can do so. It's not going to hurt you. You're going to start organizing your applications within a spreadsheet, figuring out which programs you want to apply to. You'll also start thinking about who you want to ask for your letters of recommendation. So if you're working in a lab, then that's going to be an obvious person. If there's a class that you've taken with a professor, let's say you've taken several classes with that professor and you have a relationship with them, that's a really good way to go. If it's in a topic that you are really interested in, then and you've done a good job in that class, that's a good professor to ask. You can also start contacting potential advisors. And this is a good idea to do for those of you who are attending today. Early next week, we will send you out a list of resources, including a list of faculty who are looking for students. But many people may be looking for students, or they might at least be open to it and aren't necessarily advertising. So we'll go through also an email that you can send where you can sort of politely ask if they are looking for students and get an idea of what they might be looking for. Then starting end of September, early October, you'll start sending the GRE reports if you have them. You're getting together your transcripts. This is a good time to remind your letter writers, finalize your list of applications. You'll usually start with a pretty big list of programs, and then as you get into it and start figuring out what it is that you're really interested in, what appeals to you more, and then also what kind of feedback you get from your potential advisors, you're going to finalize the list of applications that you send. Sending out applications can be kind of expensive. A lot of them will have an application fee. If you are from a low income background, it's often worth sending the program an email and asking if they have any kind of fee waivers. So here at Michigan, we do have a limited number of fee waivers. So if thinking that you want to apply here, but the application fee would be a hardship for you, contact our student affairs office. And I would say, get in line early for it, because there's a limited number of those. And then you're going to go through the big process of submitting all of those applications. And again, just keep an eye on the deadline, because the one for Michigan has moved earlier to November 15th. And that's true for several other schools as well this year. It used to all be beginning of December, but a lot of them have moved a little bit earlier. The other thing, verify that those applications are complete. You don't want it to be like your Amazon shopping cart, where you put it into the cart and you thought you bought the thing, and then 2 weeks later you're looking, you're like, oh, that's still in my cart. You don't want that to happen with your graduate school application. So make sure that it's actually submitted. In most cases, when you hit submit, it's going to send you a confirmation email. And so if you're neurotic and nervous, a good thing to do is keep track in your spreadsheet, and actually check off in there that you received that confirmation. This is also a good time. Part of verifying that your applications are complete is also checking in with your letter writers, because they are professors, and there's a reason that the absent-minded professor trope is a stereotype about us. And so most of us are going to be pretty conscientious about sending in that sort of thing, but we're human, we get busy, so it doesn't hurt to remind us, especially like a week or two before the deadline is approaching. If it doesn't look in the application like they've sent it in, sending a gentle reminder is probably a good idea. If you are going to be selected for an interview, you will start to hear your good news probably in December. I know here at Michigan, we try to do it before Christmas, so that way people sort of get their good news while they're at home on winter break and kind of celebrate with their families, hopefully. If you can not have too intense of a academic schedule in your winter semester, that can often be a good idea, because if you are going on interviews, you may be doing a lot of travel in January and February. And so for the travel, you'll be going out to interviews, you'll be meeting with different faculty members, you'll be seeing the labs and touring them. And so you're going to be interviewing them, and they're going to be interviewing you. And it's kind of stressful, but it's a lot of fun too. If you have not heard back from a program by mid to late February, that probably means that you are not being invited for an interview, or you may be waitlisted. They probably will not send you a no until closer to March, because they're maybe sort of keeping open a wait list option. So, if you don't hear back from your preferred programs by February or so, then it might be time to start looking into some of those post-bac options, or master's programs. And then most programs will want a final decision by April 15th. Again, most of the different departments around the nation have agreed on that as their time and date for it, just to keep it equal, so that way you can't have one program pressuring somebody to try to take their offer while they're still waiting back to hear from another school. One thing that can be challenging is finding programs, which area to pick. One of the wonderful things about psychology is that since humans do a lot of things and we're very complex creatures, there's a lot of ways that you can study us in our minds and brains. And then not only that, but you can also learn about psychology through animal research as well. So one thing is just kind of thinking about the kind of research that you want to do, the kind of career that you want to have. Some of these are going to be very research heavy, others are going to be more application. So it's really, kind of exploring those different areas and seeing what you think might appeal to you. So these are interests that you're going to want to expand on over a number of years. So think about the career that you want to have and which program would be best. So if you're somebody who really wants to work one-on-one with patients, then clinical psychology or maybe social work is going to be a good career for you. If you really like working with computers, then maybe cognitive science is going to be a good one. If you like understanding how the brain works, then something in cognitive neuroscience or behavioral neuroscience might be a good option. So again, what are you interested in studying? What are the things, when you walk out of class or when you read a book or hear a podcast, you're like, that is so cool. I want to get involved in that myself. You also want to, and this is a really important one, apply to programs with faculty members who have similar research interests. One of the big differences between undergraduate and graduate is that in graduate school, it's actually much less about the program or the department in the school, and it's much more about the faculty member that you're going to work with. Your faculty member almost becomes like your academic parent, because you are going to be working very closely with them. And so that is really what is going to drive your decision. And I usually advise people try to make sure that there are at least 2, ideally 3 faculty members in a department whose work you find really interesting and who you also kind of gel with on a personality level. So that way, if somebody moves or if it turns out that, oh, getting to know this person on a 2 to 3 day interview does not actually represent how well we get along in person over several years, that you have some options. And again, area is often less important than research interest. So often you might have somebody in cognitive psychology who does research that looks very similar to what somebody in a neuroscience program would be doing, or it might look very similar to what somebody in a social psychology program would be doing. So really look at the research interest and what they're doing, and maybe less so at what label in the department they have. Again, clinical is an exception, because if you do want to get a clinical license, then there's specific training that you have to do for that. And again, talk to your professors, your graduate students, your work and research supervisors. Talk to the people who hold your dream job. And, faculty, professors, we're going to be able to talk about that. But there are lots of people who go into non-academic careers who have PhDs. Look them up. Look up through your school's alumni network. Again, here at Michigan, we have a great one, but your university probably has one too. And alumni are usually thrilled to be able to talk to college students and say, hey, yeah, here's, the journey that I took, and here's how I can potentially help you. So don't feel at all shy about taking advantage of that opportunity. And again, think about what kind of training you want. Different programs are going to emphasize different things. Some of them are going to be very research heavy. Others are going to be training you more to be focused at a undergraduate college where you'll be focusing heavily on teaching. Again, if you're in a more clinical program, you might be doing more practice. And this becomes especially important for those of you who are thinking about clinical or counseling psychology. If you aren't sure of the type of programs and you don't have a lot of resources, if you're somebody who's not at Michigan and you don't have some of the same support staff in your undergraduate office, this is a really good book to look up. It's called Graduate Study in Psychology. It's put out by APA. There is no longer a hard copy. 2019 is not that long ago. Most programs don't change dramatically in a couple of years. So even if you can find that, it's probably fine. It's now only online. So at that link there, you can see if your school's library has a subscription. If not, ask your school's librarian to get one. University librarians are a wonderful and underutilized resource, and they will likely be thrilled if you go to them with a request. If you're not able to get it through that, then you can pay $20 and you can get 3 months of access to it. It'll give you the program and department descriptions, the degree options, sort of what kind of criteria they tend to use for applications. It'll tell you the application deadlines, what they're going to be looking for. If there's tuition costs, again, except for clinical, and again, if you're in a clinical science program, even a clinical science program, you're probably going to get paid. In most other graduate programs, so if you're doing biopsychology, if you're doing cognitive psychology, social psychology, personality psychology, in most cases, you will get paid to go to graduate school. Not a lot. You're not going to be driving a Ferrari, but you usually are going to get paid enough that you're going to be able to have an apartment, you're going to be able to eat. And so you will not have to worry about the tuition. If you are thinking about going into a more practice-oriented field like clinical or counseling psychology, then I would also recommend this book, The Insider's Guide to Graduate Programs in Clinical and Counseling Psychology. I put up here, sort of the list of the table of contents. And this is going to be really important because clinical programs in particular really differ a lot in whether they are training you more to be a clinician and working one-on-one with patients, or if they are training you more to be a researcher who happens to work on clinical populations and clinical questions. And so you want to try to find a program that's going to be the right fit for your particular interests in your particular career path. All right, and I think with that, then we are going to switch gears and I will let Yvette take over.
Hello. Okay, I think I answered all the questions, but if you could just double check if I missed any. Okay. Hello everybody. So, researching your programs, now that you've kind of decided what you want to do, what kind of like program you want to look into, how do you kind of start, like looking at what programs you actually want to go to, like what schools you want to go to, right? Um, sorry, Cindy, can you thank you. So first, finding schools. One of the ways that we can do this is by looking up journal articles, right? So like, let's say you're interested, you really want to look at, for example, when I was interested, I would really wanted to focus on THC. And so I looked at current publications, journals um, that worked with THC, and then looked up the authors. And then from there, I kind of looked at, okay, what program are they in? What school are they at? And are there other professors who are doing the same work? Also, just hearing from your professors, advisors, graduate students. A lot of the graduate students also have other friends in different graduate programs, right? Or your advisors, they might have gone to a different program, and they can either kind of give you an idea of like which programs might sound good, and they'll kind of give you feedback on from what they've heard from other students as well, right? Another one is looking at the US News rankings. But one of the things that you want to look for when you're looking at these programs is the main one is faculty research interests, right? You want to make sure that the research that you're doing is something that you're actually interested in, because you will be, especially if you're doing a PhD, you'll be dedicating 5 years of your life to this, maybe more. So you want to make sure that the research area that you're looking at is something that you're really interested in. Also looking at recent faculty publications. Not all faculty tend to update their website. That's usually the first thing that's neglected. So you definitely want to either look Google Scholar, PubMed, and look for the faculty and see what their most recent publications are. And especially looking at their most recent publications, because sometimes their description might not be as updated. So maybe they were looking at drugs of abuse, but maybe they've kind of like shifted to something else. So looking at their recent publication gives you an idea of what projects are they currently working on now. So what kind of research would you be doing? And if they're still like around the doing the same topic. Looking at lab websites, but again, always double checking those publications, making sure that that's up to date. And then looking at the PhD requirements, right? If you really are like don't want to do any teaching or anything like that, you want to see if this program requires any teaching, right? Or if you are really interested in getting more teaching opportunities, some programs don't have as many teaching opportunities, right? Like for example, there are some programs like UCSF, they don't have any undergraduates, right? So you're likely not going to be teaching. So that is something that's important to you. That might not be a good program for you. So looking at the requirements and what opportunities they have, depending on what you're interested in. Or if you just want to have the option of teaching, for example, you want to go to a school where they have undergraduates where you can actually teach. Um, so just thinking about those as you're kind of like looking um, for those programs. Okay, so finding the graduate programs. You want to start with a long list, and I promise you, we'll get short. Sounds kind of overwhelming at first because everything sounds super exciting. Um, Also make sure that if you're interested and you're going like right after undergrad, or you kind of want to get your feet wet and do masters, or as like kind of like a backup. If you're really interested in going to PhD, you can have both of those, on your list. But you will definitely cut your list as you're going through. And we can talk a little bit more about like how you'll cut that list in the later presentation. Okay, so looking at the pre-application, um, some ways that you'll kind of like cut down your list is which faculty are conducting research area in the areas that you're interested in, right? So you'll start off with that kind of like, all right, these are all the people, faculty that I'm interested in working with. They go to this school, etc. And then you'll narrow down your list by saying, okay, which students are actually accepting, which faculty are actually accepting students this year, right? Um, you want to keep in mind that you're applying to the specific faculty, right? Even if you're doing a rotational program, you want to have an idea of who that of having faculty that you want to work with. You're not applying to the program, you're applying to the faculty because you'll be working with them. While the program does matter, your main focus will be with the research, and so with the faculty will be like the most important part of it. Um, and you can always also send an email with your resume to the professors that you're interested in working with and saying, I can come to summer before, things like that. Checking again the publication record if you're interested in getting a lot of publications. This will kind of give you an idea of if the professors putting publications out a couple times a year, or if they're only putting out maybe like one or two every year. If publications are important to you, that's something to kind of like keep in mind as well. That and then also will help you with the mentoring style, right? If they publish with their students, and what's the quality of their publications as well. And then what's the status of the professor? That's very important because it'll kind of give you an idea of a little bit of how the lab will work. So if there are more senior faculty, maybe they're kind of like slowing down and they're like focused on one thing. So there may or may not be more opportunities for publications depending on the faculty, right? If you have a newer faculty, um, you're likely going to get more publications because they're trying to get up to that tenure status, right? So they're pumping out a lot of research. Um, but then there's they're also new, so there's less information about their mentoring style and things like that. So those kinds of things are things to consider about like what's important to you, and that will help you cut down your list a lot. Okay, so getting to the final list, you want to have faculty with similar research interests. See that you've had like positive contact with the professors. You have aligned with their criteria. You have the research background. If they ask for GRE scores, you have taken the test and things like that. And you definitely want to have at least two or more potential advisors that let's say it didn't work out with one faculty, you wouldn't mind working with this other faculty. It's like I said, it's 5 years, right? Or more depending on the program. A lot of things can change, or maybe you end up not liking the lab, things like that. You want to be able to give yourself flexibility to move to another lab if something happens under any circumstance. Um, and you're not stuck in a lab that you're not really sure the kind of research that they're doing, or you're not really interested in that. So you want to have two or more, or again, in case you end up hitting it off better with one faculty member than another, you want to give yourself that leeway. So definitely keep programs that you have two or more faculty members that you're interested in. I would cut any that you only have one. You should have a few safety schools / reach schools. obviously when you're, interviewing, you don't want to tell them that this is a safety school or anything like that. But just kind of have that in mind. And you want to have that like on your list. Okay. So as you're, trying to narrow down your list and you want to see, if they're taking students and you're contacting professors, you definitely want to one email the professors that you're interested in working with. Um, you'll want to, introduce yourself and then talk about the interests that you feel overlap with what you're interested in with their research, right? And then you also kind of want to ask more information. Most importantly, you want to ask if they're taking students, what current projects are they working on, or what projects are their graduate students working on, any future research directions, things like that. If they have a current project displayed on their website, um, and it's current, don't ask that information because then those of you have not even looked at their website. So definitely make sure that if you're asking about their current projects, it's not directly on the website, and maybe it's like if you found it on a publication, that's fine to ask about. But if it's like directly on the website, especially if it's like in the main page, don't ask about that. It'll seem as if you're a bit unprepared. So definitely one of those do's and don'ts when you're contacting a professor. Okay, and then the next slide will show an example email. Okay, so here's an example email of how you might want to approach emailing a potential professor that you're interested in. You introduce yourself, your background. If you're doing your undergraduate, you can add that in there. Let them know that you're applying to the program, and obviously, letting them know what your research interest is and how that overlaps, right? With the professor. Um, Here they're asking a little bit more about the current projects that they're working on, right? And you want to also you should include at least like your resume, or if you don't have a CV, a resume, so that they can kind of get a little bit more information about you, um and just kind of one, and then asking the question, are they taking new graduate students? So these are some kind of like key points that you want to add. um be clear and concise, but definitely ask the main questions that you're trying to ask. Okay, so now that you've decided you're applying to the program and what does the actual application look like, right? So there's a couple of things that are pretty standard across all programs. One is a statement of purpose. You are trying to convince the admissions committee that you are the right choice for their program. You're not talking about your psychopathology. You're just trying to kind of let them know this is the research that I've done. This is why I'm a good fit for the program. Um, they'll want your transcripts of all the schools attended, maybe official or unofficial. So if you did a study abroad program, if you took a community college class, or if you transferred and did some classes in community college, they'll want all of those transcripts. And they'll specify if they can be unofficial, but most do ask for official. So just kind of keep that in mind for your deadline. You want to make sure that you have an idea of how long it takes to process, because they need to have received it before the application deadline. And then you want letters of recommendation. Usually they request 3, and you should definitely request 2 to 3 months in advance to your professors, just so they kind of have an idea that they have this upcoming deadline. You'll check if the GRE scores are required, and make sure you send those out if they are. Then they have a university application form, and then they usually have, it depends on the program, they might have a specific department application, um, and then they will usually ask for your CV. And sometimes they won't ask for a writing sample, but they'll give you an option to include that in your application. So if you have something like an honors thesis, or a research paper for your class, you can definitely add that in there as well. Okay, so getting organized. it's a long process. It's kind of like a second job, honestly, applying for grad school. So try to keep yourself organized because it's easy to kind of mix it up, especially with you applying to multiple schools. So one, have all the necessary documents in one place so that when it comes up in the application or anything like that, you have that in there. Keep the contact and school information in one place. Keep it organized. You can do an Excel sheet where you have all that information. Um, Make sure to proofread your statement of purpose. Make sure that it's going to the right school and that you're uploading the right documents. So make sure those are labeled properly as well. Plan to spend about 5 hours every week working on your application to get your materials ready. Don't underestimate how long it takes to just do the application itself, like just the general application form. It seems easy because you're just putting in all your information, but sometimes they ask for courses. Um, they ask for a lot of information. So just sometimes you could just spend time sitting there doing the application and it's tedious and you don't realize how long it is. So definitely set aside time to just sit there and do the application on top of the other application materials that are needed. Okay, so looking at some of the things that admissions take into consideration for as they're like looking for students. A big one is definitely your research experience, right? They want to see that you know what research is, you have an idea of how it works. Not all programs require you to have like a publication or anything like that, but at least kind of knowing the process of the research experience and maybe being able to say that you were able to independently work on a project, things like that. Your GPA is important, although it's a little less important than your research experience. Um, your recommendations are important as well, and something that we'll talk about later in the presentation is the quality of those recommendations are important. They won't get you into grad school, but they can hurt you basically. So make sure that you're getting quality letters of recommendations. Um, your GRE, depending if the program may or may not require it, some psychology relevant extracurriculars. Those are not as important, but they do show some leadership skills and things like that. So that's very important to add that in there, and then other extracurricular activities as well. Okay, so the GRE, they have verbal, quantitative, and an essay component. The importance varies. It depends on the school. University of Michigan does not require it. Very few are requiring it now. And some do require the psychology subject test, which is there's a general GRE and then there's specific subject a GRE test, and some may require the psychology subject test, but they'll all be listed in the website. So make sure that you're looking at that, and if that is something that is required, that you're planning in advance your test date, because you do again need to send that information before the deadline is due. Some programs have cutoffs and others don't. Usually the programs will have their average GRE scores on the websites of like the students that they admitted. So if you're kind of interested in seeing like what would be a good score, you can always look at their website and they usually have an average of what scores the newly admitted students had. If you're applying this year, definitely take it as soon as possible. Especially with the deadline being in November 15th this year. Scores are valid for up to 5 years, and it does take some time to receive and send those scores. So you definitely want to plan for that. And then especially if you need to retake it, you definitely want to plan in advance to give yourself time to take it again, study for it, and then also be able to send out the scores in time. You should spend about 1 to 3 months preparing. They have websites, apps, classes, practice exams, and they have booklets that also kind of have different practice questions and practice exams as well. It does cost money to send scores to each school. You do get the free score report, but in order for yourself, but in order to actually send it to the school, you do have to pay for that. And then also to take the test, there is a cost for that as well. So something to keep in mind. Okay, and then we have the statement of purpose. It's usually about 1.5 to 2 pages long. That's usually the cutoff, but it depends on the program. Here you want to talk about your research history, your interests, and why you want to go to this particular program. Some programs may have break it up into a statement of purpose and a personal statement. And your statement of purpose will be more about your research, and your personal statement will be a little bit more about you, your backgrounds, and kind of like how that plays into your interest for research and things like that. Okay, so some possible structure. Um, why psychology, for example, if we're using psychology as an example, slash your area of research excites you. Any backgrounds that might add on to why you're interested in this area of research to begin with, your research experiences, your specific interests, plans for graduate school and beyond. So, if you want to be a professor, you definitely want to kind of talk about how the PhD will help you get to that long-term career goal. And then you want to definitely have why this particular school. So when you're talking about that, you want to mention the faculty that you're interested in working with, why you would want to be working with them, and that kind of helps bring to the point of why the specific school. Some tips, you want to be concise. You want to avoid cliches. Have as many people read it as possible just to get some edits. And do not use the exact same statement for each program. You will need to, you'll have a general skeleton of the statement that you'll be using, but you'll have to tailor it to each program. Um, Show, don't tell, don't be arrogant. One thing I will say, especially as a first gen, and I had a really hard time with this, was um just talking about all your accomplishments. Um, don't feel like there's a line between being arrogant and showing off, right? But be proud of the work that you've done, especially, if you got a lot of research done, you were able to get some publications and things like that. Definitely don't be afraid to talk about that, and make sure that other people are reading it, so if it does come off as arrogant, they kind of give you that temperature check and let you know. um but yes, don't be afraid to talk about all the accomplishments that you've done to kind of help you get to this point, and how those experiences and those accomplishments have prepared you for graduate school. Okay, some do's and don'ts. So here we have one statement of purpose that would be a don't. So psychology has always been a particular interest to me, as I have commonly empathized with and wish to help others while attending blank university. I took several classes related to close and romantic relationships. I believe I'm prepared to attend graduate school due to my hard work ethic and academic success. In some of my undergraduate classes, I acquired practice in psychology and developed a deep passion for the field. With a current GPA of 3.71, I trust I am able to excel at blank university. So some of the reasons why this would be a don't is, for example, um, they're not really talking about what psychology research interest they're in, right? It's very general. I'm like just interested in psychology. They're not really giving more specifics on that. Um, and Once they start talking about the close and romantic relationships, it kind of feels off, right? Because they didn't really give us any information on what their interest is. And so then as a reader, I'm thinking, okay, so maybe they're interested in closer romantic relationships, um, but not really sure, right? And then they're talking about their hard work ethic and academic successes, but what does that mean, right? Did they publish a paper? Did they run their own independent projects? Things like that. So if the reader doesn't know what you don't tell them, So make sure that you are very specific in these achievements, experience, so that they can actually know what experience is going to help you show them that you're prepared. And again, they have no specifics on the actual university. So I wouldn't be sure, which professors they're trying to work with, or anything like that. So you want to be specific um, to the program. Okay. So here is an example of a do. So during the past 3.5 years, I have gained a wealth of knowledge from two unexpected sources: the female long Evan rat and the vaginal I'm not going to attempt that word. While majoring in animal behavior at Southwestern University, I spent over 2 years studying in the mating behavior of rats in Dr. Faye Goraxi's lab, behavioral neuroscience laboratory. Initially, I conducted the experiment involving the influences of competition and cooperation of mate choice as a part of the course. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you can kind of see the stark difference, right? They explained exactly what they have worked with, what their experience entails, who they have worked with, what research topic that they worked on, and kind of like what they also talk about some methods that they use as well. And so here's just another example of another do, right? They explain: while researching female rat sexual behavior, I enjoy learning how steroid hormones act on the brain to influence mating behavior and mate choice. Um, and so here they're kind of talking about exactly like what they did. And like I said, the reader doesn't know what you don't tell them. So now I know what kind of research they did during their undergrad experience. And so now I know, okay. And once they talk about the professor they're interested in, I can know, okay, they would actually be a good fit for them because they've done X and Y research that is related to them, and things like that. Okay, so the letters of recommendation, as I mentioned, it's important to have quality letters of recommendation, right? So first, you need to have 3 letters. It's best if they come from research advisors, your principal investigator of the lab, um, graduate students or postdocs can also help as well if you worked closely with them. They can also come from professors in a class you've done really well in, or previous employers who know you well. You want to establish these relationships early, but you definitely want to make sure that um, these professors know you on a little bit more of a personal level, right? So if you're asking a professor from a class, make sure you've gone to their office hours, especially if it's a big lecture class. You want to make sure that they know you a little bit, because if they don't know you on a personal level, or really write more of a general letter of recommendation, you can tell as a reader when you're reading it. So it's important to make sure that you're establishing those relationships early, so that when they do write the letter, we can see that they actually do know who you are. And so how to ask, you want to ask at least 1 month in advance, preferably two, just to kind of make sure that you have all your letters, the people who you have asked. And in case one of them says no, you have time to kind of figure out who you want to ask to be your third letter of recommendation. Don't make assumptions. Um, and say this is something you would be willing to do or believe you can provide me with a strong recommendation, right? When you're asking, make sure that you are asking for if they can give you a strong letter of recommendation. And if they say they don't feel comfortable giving you a strong letter of recommendation, then I would say, thank you for taking the time to read this, and for taking into consideration, and then pivot to someone else who may be able to give you a more strong letter of recommendation. Definitely do not submit their contact information before they say yes. Um, and a good way to ask is usually over email. You may want to meet them in person at some point to kind of talk about, your research interests, so they can kind of have an idea of how to write your letter. But a good way to kind of start is through email. Okay, and then you want to make this as easy as possible for the letter writers, so that they can submit all your letters on time. You want to give them a packet that includes the names of the schools and programs, um, deadlines for each of the schools, application instructions, whether they're going to get a link, or if it needs to be mailed. You want to give them a draft of your personal statement. It doesn't have to be the final draft, but you want to give them a good rough draft. So again, they can add like those personal details in there, your CV, transcripts, and any GRE scores, so that they have all the full information on you to be able to write a good, strong letter of recommendation. As you get close to the deadline, you want to friendly send a reminder that the deadline is coming up, especially if there's multiple deadlines. You want to send an email before the first deadline and then maybe another one before the second deadline if they don't end up um, doing them at the same time. You want to make sure that you thank your letter writers. Gifts aren't really necessary, but a thank you card, notes, email, letting them know that thank you for, taking the time to do this for me. And we especially love to hear updates. If you end up getting anywhere, we'd love to hear that. So, if you remember, I know it's stressful during that time. I would definitely recommend letting your professors know any updates on your success. Okay, so here we have an example of a CV. This is from a past graduate mentor, Crystal Carm. And this is just kind of generally how a CV looks like. You want to have your academic preparation, which is, your school, your GPA, the major that you're doing, and then any honors or awards. And then in the next slide, you'll show any relevant opportunities, right? So if you did any research, if you were a mentor, research assistant, things like that, this is where you want to have that information. And you want to have the principal investigator and then a description of the tasks that you did, right? Or any techniques that you learned. It's good to have in there as well. And this is my CV that I turned in. So it doesn't have to look super professional. Like I just had my lab research experience and then one other experience I did over the summer. So Crystal did a lot and I was not there yet. So it doesn't have to look too full in there, but definitely I put the skills that I learned and what behavior tasks I ran because that might be important for, especially if some faculty are looking for a specific graduate student that knows how to do a specific behavior task. That can always be good in your favor. So definitely add those skills in there as it might be an advantage to you. All right, and then after that, hopefully it's submitted. And now hearing from schools. So some schools might reach out to do a full phone interview before they send out any like final decisions. Maybe they want to get to know a little bit more information about your application. These are usually short and informal. Then after decisions have been made, they send out either in-person interviews or recruitment weekends. Um, for a lot of the programs, you've either been shortlisted or already accepted. You get invited to these schools, and it's usually 2, 3 days of you learning a lot about the program, what it offers, networking with graduate students, but also interviewing with graduate students and then interviewing with the professor. So during this time, you're being interviewed, but you're also interviewing the program. You want to make sure that you like the program, you like the graduate students. The graduate students don't look miserable. It's an important thing. And if you like the atmosphere, right? So those are some things that you want to like mentally take notes of. Especially if you get multiple offers, you can kind of have that as your checklist. Like, okay, I really liked these schools, but the students didn't look as happy here. So that's kind of something to take into consideration. And something to keep in mind is that you are interviewing 24/7, right? Usually, a grad student might pick you up from the airport and while they're not interviewing you per se, if you happen to make a bad impression, they will kind of let the committee know. So you're not interviewing 24/7, but you definitely have to keep in mind on your behavior, throughout the whole weekend. Um, because if something does come up, they'll kind of bring it up to the committee as well. Um, okay, and so some questions to ask, like I mentioned, right? You're also kind of interviewing the school and seeing if it's a fit for you. Um, one thing you want to ask is like, are the students independent, or more directed, right? Like, do they kind of like work on their own, or do they have a little bit more of direction from there? That's something to ask the grad students. You want to ask yourself, how many does grad students, and also ask the faculty, how many grad students does the faculty have, right? If you're interested in getting being in a smaller lab to kind of get more direct focus, if that's important to you, you want to ask how many graduate students are in the lab. What is the nature of the program, right? Are people generally collaborative, or are they competitive and they don't really work together? You definitely want to ask past and current students pros and cons of the PI. Um, Tip, you definitely want to ask the older students. They are at the end of the program, so they're likely to be more honest. New students, one, they haven't been there that long, but two, they're just not as informed just yet. And the older students also know a little bit more about, like, if they've heard of any other, faculty that you're applying to, that they might, warn you about, things like that. So definitely, if you can, I would definitely ask the older students. They're usually a little bit more honest, since they've just been here for so long. And then you want to ask definitely about the financial package, the requirements, things like that, especially um the financial package is very important, not just like how much you're getting paid, right? But also what it entails. Like, are you getting 5 years fully funded? Are you having to teach if you're not fully funded? Um, is there fellowship opportunities, things like that, that you may want to ask. Okay, so you are now, in the stage of making a decision. Some overrated factors. Graduate school is different. While the prestige of a university may sound a super important part, a lot of what really matters is the prestige, mainly of like the research and the program, right? Not really as much the university. Um, and also the prestige of the faculty advisor. While, it sounds great, sometimes if the mentoring style doesn't fit, then you might not like learn or grow in the lab as much as you would like, or be mentored the way you would like. So that's something that's important to think about. Less the procedure, more about the mentoring style, because that's what's going to set you up for success in your program. The absolute stipend, location, definitely be a little bit more open-minded if you can. I know there's a lot of either like financial, familial responsibilities, things like that, that may play a role, but location is not as important as you think, as you go through the program. Um, and some underrated factors, definitely the research match, right? Like I said, you're going to be doing this for 5+ years. You want to like the research that you're doing, be excited about the research that you're doing, especially, when you're going into lab at like 7 p.m. and it's been a long day. I'm like, all right, but I really am interested in this work. So I want to finish the day so I can get my results. You definitely want to be interested in the research. Um, the personality of the faculty advisor slash the mentoring style of the faculty advisor. Think about whether you are interested, if you want an advisor who is a little bit more micromanaging, like gives you deadlines, is kind of more structured in that way. If that's important to you, that's definitely something to keep in mind. Or if you don't work well with somebody who's micromanaging, you want like a little bit more of independence. And just kind of like shows you the ropes, and then kind of lets you set your own deadlines. If you will hold yourself accountable and like continue submitting your research and your results. And if that's important to you, that's something that you definitely want to ask the graduate students and the research advisor as well. What's their mentoring style, and is that a fit for what you are looking for? Other students, like I said, you want to make sure that the students are generally happy, you know. I definitely went to some programs where it seemed like the students didn't hang out at all, or were just like really like closed in their lab and didn't really get to know other people in the program. And that's not something I was personally looking for. I was looking for more of a community. I came from California and it was my first time moving out of California. So I was like, yeah, I want to be in a place where I feel like I'm gonna have a community. So University of Michigan was that for me. And you know, the students looked happy, they hung out, and you can definitely tell that they hung out often. And that was something that was important to me. So that's something you want to take into consideration. The students and kind of like how they get along. Um, Departmental collaborations and also resources, right, from the department and as a lab, you want to make sure that um, you'll be supported, right? Especially if you know you want to go to conferences. Are there resources for that? If you need new equipment, are there options to get a stipend for your specific research project? And most importantly, work-life balance, right? Do students take time off? You know, some programs are different and taking time off is like kind of like frowned upon, right? And other programs, they really work on that work-life balance, making sure that, you know, you are taking your breaks. So those are some factors that you should really take into consideration to help you pick the right choice for you. Okay, and then you know, as you've done your applications, there's another thing that you want to take into consideration, which is some optional fellowships. You have the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship Program, or the GRFP. That's usually due in October, so it's usually due a month before your actual applications are due. For the GRFP, you can apply once in your undergraduate and then once in your graduate program during your first or second year. So that's something to keep in mind. You know, if especially if you're going if you're thinking about your program, it is always nice to have funding coming in. That would definitely make you more attractive to some programs if you already have your own funding coming in. So that's something to consider applying for. And if you apply your undergraduate and you don't get it, you can reapply during your graduate program. But if you only apply once during your graduate program, you can't reapply again. So it's always nice to also try to apply and get some feedback, and then you can, you know, use that feedback to use it for the next cycle. And then there's also the Ford Foundation um, fellowship that's usually due in December. So those are some other options that you want to look into. Okay, and then I will stop talking now and pass it over to Sydney.
All right. So for applying to Michigan, and again, we'll send you out probably early next week a email with the link to the recording for this and also a bunch of different resources. But I would encourage you all to, you know, check out our psychology work website. Take a look at all the different program areas. You know, we have a link that is for prospective graduate students that will tell you, here's what you need to apply. Here's the admissions fact. You know, you can take a look at our faculty members in the faculty directory, and we also have a place where you can search by research interest. So if you just know, like, hey, you know, I really want to do something on sensory science, and you know, like I'm really interested in learning EEG, then you know, it will help you locate the faculty members here who are doing that kind of work. Um, there's also the Rackham Graduate School admissions website that will also tell you where you need to do, where you need to send your application with the formal application. And again, it's going to open on September 1st. So I guess it actually already is open. If you have already done your research and you're ready to go, you can go ahead and apply. But again, the deadline is November 15th. Email psych.saa@umich.edu for any questions. And as I said, if you want to apply for a waiver to the application fee, if you're from a low income background, then you can ask about that there too. We do have a limited number, so we can't give it to everybody, but they'll basically sort of take a look on a case by case basis. I will also recommend on the psychology website, some people were asking about like alternative careers that you can do with a degree in psychology. We have a lot of info there. We also have a whole bank of personal statements and research statements from our own graduate students who successfully applied here. So you can just use those as examples for what we're looking for. Why come to Michigan? We have a lot going on here. We have a lot of different doctoral programs. And so, you can, within, sort of the areas that we're talking about here, you could do psychology, you could do the neuroscience program, you could do cognitive science, you could do linguistics. I mean, there's a lot of different options that you can choose. And not only that, but one of the things that's really nice is that even if you're not doing that particular area of research, it might be related to your area of research. So like right now I'm teaching a graduate seminar in learning and memory. And in addition to my students from psychology, I also have students from the neuroscience program in there. I also have students from the computer science program in there. And so it's really fun because we all get to learn from each other as well. You also have different certificate programs. So let's say you come in, you want to do your degree in an area of psychology, so you want to do it in biopsychology, but you know that you also really want to make sure that you're building up your statistics and math background because you want to do a lot of modeling, so that you can get a certificate that focuses specifically on that, or you want to do computational neuroscience, you can do that. Or let's say you're going in a different direction and you want to do something that's more DEI focused, then you can do something like you can get a certificate that's really focused on that particular specialization. We have a lot of resources and support for parents with different needs. We have a student parent society, we have a student veterans group, disabled students, undocumented. Again, it's one of the advantages of being so big is that we have students of so many different backgrounds here that we're able to then make sure that we also have the services to support them, and also the community to support them. There are a bunch of different funding opportunities, and again, you can see more about that on our website. But you will have, in addition to the money that the leader of your lab has for the research, you as a graduate student, there's money that's separately set aside for you for your research or for conference travel. And so even if your lab PI doesn't have money or isn't able to allocate that to you for something that you want to do, you can actually apply directly to the graduate school or directly to the department for that. And I've had students do that before where they are doing their main project with me to do their dissertation, but they have this other little side project that they want to explore because it's just sort of their passion and their interest, but it's not really what's going on in my lab. And so I'm like, well, use your $2,500 to rack of money for that, and then I'll pay for your main stuff out of our lab funds. Michigan is one of the leaders in DEI, and we're really big on the inclusion aspect. We try very hard to incorporate student voices and a lot of different voices. We have a lot of different what we call student affinity groups, so students of different backgrounds all have their own graduate student groups. And they all also meet with our department leadership. So with the chair of our department, and we have a graduate student leadership council. And so they really try to have a voice, and we really try to have a great community here. Financial support, we have a lot. We have even more after last year. So our graduate student stipends are pretty competitive. There's also a lot of different fellowships, our RACA Merit Fellowship, graduate student research grants, international research awards, a bunch of different travel grants, and depending on the different areas that you're in, many different areas have specific funds that donors have set up to say, like, I'm really interested in people who are doing research on stress and trauma, so I'm going to set up a separate fund just for them that some private donor has set up for us. A lot of different examples of that sort of things. There's grants and public scholarship. If you are thinking, well, maybe I want to use my science background and use that to make a difference in public policy, and I want to go do an internship in DC, there's support for that sort of thing. There's also emergency funds. You are getting a stipend, but as I said, you're not going to be rolling in dough. And so sometimes things happen. Your 1999 Corolla decides to break down on you, but you really, really need it to be able to get into the lab. So then you can apply for emergency funds that will help float you through that so you can actually get the car repaired and continue to do your research. So we're really dedicated to student success. Likewise, community and support. 23% of graduate students are first generation. We also have a lot of our faculty member who are first generation, and you can actually take a look. We have a first generation student support network. We have the students of color of Rackham. So that's again throughout the university, the graduate students. Over 1,000 graduate student organizations. So whatever your particular research is, like, you're going to find other people of like mind here and be able to find that community. So good luck. Here's a list of links. And as I said, we will send out probably early next week, both a link to this recording and a bunch of other links. So, get on that process, get exploring. There's tons of support. Don't be afraid to reach out to folks and ask for it. And we will hope to see you at some of our other sessions as well. So that is all that we have today. And so we will hang out for a little bit and see if you all have any questions. Oh, I think I see one in the chat. Oh. And if you do have questions, feel free to either put them in the chat, or if you want to either raise your hand or unmute your mic, go ahead.
Hi, I don't have any specific questions, but just in general, like about the type of research that you can do in the fields like of psychology or neuroscience. Can you just tell me some of the most like popular or like common research areas that people tend to choose? Like a few labs, maybe.
Wow, it's really varied. I would say one way to think about it would be if you go to the University of Michigan, if you go to our psychology website, you have the areas. And so let me see if I can run through them in a bit, like maybe you can catch me if I miss anybody. You would have clinical science. So our clinical program here is one that is a very research-oriented one. So they will train you to get your licensure, but they're really training you more to be like somebody who tries to understand psychopathology. Then you have the cognition and cognitive neuroscience area, which is my area. And so that area is mostly working with humans. And we're trying to understand sort of like how things like attention and memory work. And we might be doing neuroimaging. And then there is Yvette's area, which they have just recently changed their name to brain and behavior. But I think you'll still find listed under biopsychology, or sometimes people call that behavioral neuroscience, where a lot of times there you'll be doing animal research, and you're looking at all different kinds of questions there. So, you're looking at everything from gender differences to addiction to how does oxytocin lead to bonding, to attention, but trying to look at it through animals where you can do experiments that you can't do with humans. So there's a lot of different options within there. Then developmental psychology, so that sort of understanding how we change across the course of the lifespan. And again, within developmental psychology, they have both the more like social development, so how our emotional processes change and our interactions change, but then they also have folks who are more focused on like how our learning mechanisms change. So even within that. So let's see. So then we have personality. And so personality and social context. So sort of who are you as a person? Sort of like what is your pre-installed, tendencies? We all have our own personalities. And then how do those interact with the people around us and the context that we are in? And then social psychology tends to be more generally like how we operate in groups. So if those of you know, if you know the Dunning-Kruger effect, David Dunning is actually here. Then we have, sexuality and women's and gender studies. We also have the combined program in education and psychology. Who am I forgetting of it? Do you have the list?
I think that's it. I was thinking of CPEP, but
yeah, okay. So yeah, I mean, I would say take a look at that list, but like all of those are pretty common ones. And then like somebody asked about organizational psychology. So we no longer have an organizational psych program here, but we have organizational studies, which is sort of a joint program between psychology and I think the business school. So
Okay, thank you so much.
yeah, so really, you know, I would say you find the question that you want to research and the way that you want to research it, and don't worry so much about the labels. For letters of rec, so yes, you could definitely ask a postdoc. A lot of times, what people will do is if they may have the postdoc actually write the letter, but then the person who is supervising the postdoc might also sign off on the letter because they might be the person who's sort of more well known to others. Emma, go ahead.
Hello. Thank you so much to today's webinar. I am already senior and I feel like I'm behind. I currently volunteering as a research assistant, but
Okay.
yeah, but I honestly I am not like extremely interested in this area. Is that good idea to continue as a research assistant volunteering?
So what I would say is you stay on as the research assistant there, but start looking for other labs that might be a better fit for your interests.
Okay.
So see if you can do a research assistant position there. But so I mean, can you tell me a little bit more about the kind of research that you're doing now and what you think you might like to go into?
Yes, currently I am volunteering for the education or learning
Okay.
for middle school student area. And then I actually am interested in more of like behavioral neuroscience area, but it's extremely hard to get the research assistant position.
Mhm.
I'm actually not a Michigan student. I'm a UCLA. Um, so I would like to obtain your advice or what should I do right now?
So that I'm gonna let you catch that one a little bit and talk maybe a little bit about what kind of skills she could try to build to make her a good applicant for that. Right? Because
Okay.
I mean, so there will be some things that you'll have as transferable skills. So just the organization, being able to like handle data and so on, like that's going to be a good start.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, I
but I
do.
think there might be some other skills that are more specific to the behavioral neuroscience that you may want to sort of like build a little bit on your side time to make you a competitive applicant there.
Okay. So, for example, Python or MATLAB or stuff like that.
Those will never hurt.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah, it
kind
definitely
of.
depends on the lab that you're applying to. For example, like I had to learn MATLAB against my will, but they definitely helped. And when we were looking for graduate students, we did take that into account because now that we're doing like more a little bit more like neural networking kind of work, it is skill useful to have those. Some things to keep in mind if you don't have any, if you the lab that you're applying to is animal based, you know, if you're gonna work with
Yeah.
rats, mice,
Mhm.
things like that, and you don't have any experience in that,
No.
I would definitely try to get experience like as a lab manager and things like that. But if you have worked, you know, in an animal shelter, in a vet, something like that,
Oh,
just showing that you have skills that like you can work with animals is a
yeah.
good way to show that as well. But I would definitely try to is if you are interested in a more animal-based lab, I would definitely try to transition into that because that is like an important skill that is definitely needed for a grad student. And not a lot of professors tend to take students who don't have any lab experience. It's not that it's impossible, but it will definitely increase your chances and especially increase your chances at a lab that you might be like more interested in. So I would definitely try to do that, or even if you can volunteer in a lab working with animals um,
Mhm.
and talking about that experience will definitely help you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, so Manderson?
Yes, can you hear me?
I'm not so Manderson, I think you said something, but I'm not sure we were quite able to hear you.
Wait, are you able to hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Okay, sorry. I was connected to my headphones and I guess it wasn't working that way. You guys said that y'all were gonna send links out about
Mhm.
with this recording and more information. I'm currently a University of Houston student, so I'm not
Mhm.
a Michigan student. And I was wondering if you guys could send the links.
Yes,
Um,
we will. So the email that you used to register for the session,
right.
yeah, so we have that recorded, and so we'll that's what we'll use to send things out to folks.
Okay, awesome, great. And I had one more question. Um, I just recently I know there's a lot of different fields that I mean or topics that you can go into. I was wondering if you guys have any research on like with autism.
I don't think there's anybody here in Michigan currently doing autism research.
Say if you because right now I'm not sure. I'm still open in what I want to,
Mhm.
I guess, do exactly because right now I'm a research assistant at University of Houston for bilingualism.
Okay.
So I'm still open, I guess, to find my exact field, but I'm also a former behavioral therapist, so I did work with kids on the spectrum.
Mhm.
Um, and I guess I just need to, look, but say like when you apply and if you're not 100% sure like what you want to do you have any recommendation on how I can narrow it more down?
Yeah, so I can definitely talk a little bit about that. I was, interested in drugs of abuse, but kind of not really sure what I did,
Yeah.
what I wanted to do. Are you in your last year or are you in your junior year?
Yeah, I'm in my last year, so I'm kind of I wanted to go into the physician assistant route, and then I realized like because I was also a medical scribe, and I realized maybe I'm not interested in this anymore.
Yeah.
So I've kind of been all over the place, and I you have your email because I think I have like one more question to ask, but you can
Yeah.
finish. Sorry.
Yeah, so one thing I would recommend is um maybe a post back on doing like a different research field. So for example, when I was looking at drugs of abuse, I was like, okay, am I interested in behavior or do I want to go like the more cellular molecular routes? And so I did a summer research experience in a lab where I did bench lab work, looking at like proteins and things like that. And I realized I did not like it at all.
Yeah.
But and it was fine. I did my time there and I did the work. But that really helped me narrow down. I'm like, okay, I don't want to focus on the cellular side. I really want and I really enjoyed the lab work that I was doing. So I was like, okay, I want to focus on the behavior side. So that really cut down my list a lot because when I was like looking at the descriptions of what faculty were like looking at, I was like, okay, if they're doing more bench lab work that's just like cellular stuff, I was like, okay, that lab's not for me. If they're focusing on the behavior, then that lab is for me. So if you have like different experiences where you're like, I know I definitely don't want to like do this part of like research, that will definitely help you like cut down what you're interested in. And then also talking to like grad students who are like in the research fields that you might be interested, you can kind of ask like what their day-to-day is and like how they like conduct their research, and that might give you a better idea if that's what you're interested in, or if it kind of sounds like something maybe not what you were going for. That'll help you narrow down your list a little bit.
Is there like a minimum GPA for Michigan for y'all's graduate program?
So
Do you-
we don't have any hard minimums, or like either on the GPA, and I think actually now we aren't looking at the GRE at all. Um, so I mean, it's sort of we do what's called a holistic review, where we sort of take a look, like at the person on a lot of different dimensions. So, GPA is certainly one of them, but then also what is the research experience? But then like also like what is the path that the person took to get there? So again, like using one of my students as a example, his, numeric GPA was like not the greatest because, the first time that he tried college, it was just not the right fit for where he was at the time in his life. And so he actually took some time off even from undergrad, came back. And so, then like we were able to see that trajectory of improvement and like dedication in his last 2 years and like how he went forward in his lab experience in the post-bac afterwards. And so that to me was actually an even more promising trajectory than somebody who necessarily just kind of like sailed through undergrad, like all with the straight A's, and they were just very focused on their classes. So so basically we don't have the minimums. We really try to take a look at you as the whole person.
Okay, would you recommend a post-bac if your GPA isn't the greatest?
I think it can be helpful because then you can sort of show that you get the research experience. That might also be something like master's programs are sort of iffy because some of them, I'll be honest, some of them are just designed to take your money.
Yeah.
So you do want to, if you're going to think about a master's program, research it heavily and see where their students end up afterwards. But it can also be a really good way if particularly if you had like, that first couple of years that were a little rough, or you need to show that you can do it. It can be a good way to demonstrate that you can take grad courses. So I've also had students like come through my lab, when the GRE was more of a popular thing, and she was a great student, but she just did horribly on tests.
Yeah.
And so she did the master's program with me to demonstrate like, yes, I can do a project. Yes, I can take grad courses and do well in those.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Sure. I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce the name correctly, but Huabai.
Yes, that's correct.
Great.
Yeah, thank you for talking through this. It's really helpful. I have a question about, I know PhD program is really research heavy. So for taking PhD student, research experience is really heavily weighted, but I don't know like to what extent, or like to what extent could I feel like I'm prepared, have enough research experience. I heard some people saying like better to have some first author publications. Some people said no, you are just you just need like independent project and know what you want to do. That's enough. So I don't know, like I know there is no general rules for that, but I just want to have a sense of like what kind of experience and yeah, like when should I feel like confident or like prepared to apply?
Do you know what area you're interested in? Because it kind of like heavily depends on the area.
Yeah, I'm interested in clinical psychology.
That is the toughest one.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
So I will say, so that's one where I would say like, it might be worth the investment to get that APA guide that I was talking about before. Because even within clinical, it's gonna depend a lot. So like our clinical science program, it's insane what it takes to get in. I'll just be very honest. Because they get something like 700 applications for 2 or 3 slots. And so, they almost really won't even look at people unless they've had a couple of years of research experience out, have really, a very strong application and are like a perfect fit for the faculty member. But there's other programs where, like maybe you are the perfect fit because like the research experience that you have and the things that you want to research like are a really great fit. Or they might not be quite as research heavy. So I would say, just really look at the programs and the labs. And I would say, I wouldn't do this to everybody, but as you're starting to narrow it down to, let's say, maybe, 15-ish or so programs that you think you might be really interested in faculty members, it can sometimes, like if you want to get a sense of where you're at in the process, I would say it doesn't hurt, in addition to emailing the faculty member, see if they have any current graduate students, and they're likely to be sympathetic to you, and just sort of say, hey, I'm thinking about applying to your lab, would you mind like taking a look at my CV and like telling me how that compares to where you were at, and like, giving me any thoughts you have on it. They may not feel comfortable doing that because they're, some of them may say like, well, that's the faculty member's decision. But I think a lot of them, they've been through that stressful process as well. And so a lot of people are going to be sympathetic and happy to give you some feedback on that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the tips.
Yeah.
And in general, publications do help.
Yeah, publications do help, particularly if they're related to the area that you think you're going to be doing.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
Yep. All right, any other questions?
Hi, my name is Mingro, and I am not the student from the University of Michigan, and I have a questions about GRE. So, actually, I just get started for the GRE test because one of my friends, or they said it seems that many universities realize that without a GRE, the application situation become more unfair because there are some students with more resources will have more chances that can get them better prepared. So more and more universities begin emphasize the GRE again, but it is already the end of the September. And it seems that's a little bit urgent for me to prepare for the GRE. So I feel confused whether I should put more efforts on GRE or maybe I should focus my energies on the application procedure itself.
So I guess, so a couple of things. So first of all, I would just, start by doing that initial research of seeing which programs that you are interested in, like which ones require it, which ones are like, it's an optional thing you can include versus not. And then, which ones are like, so Michigan, I think is at the point where like the faculty don't even get that information. So first of all, like that would be one way to prioritize it, right? It's just see, do the programs that you want to apply to, do they even need it, or will they even look at it? What I would say is, like I would probably put more effort into the research statement and like building up your CV and any skills, because the GRE is sort of something where it's like, in some cases there's like if you do really badly on it, that will bring you down. If you do, sort of like amazingly well on it, that will make your application stand out. But there's a wide swath in between it where you got a score that's like good, and then it doesn't really matter like how good it is, unless it's sort of something where we're like, oh wow, they really knocked it out of the park. The only thing where I could say like sometimes it matters, I know like sometimes we have a couple of faculty member who do really heavy computational or math psychology, and so they will put more emphasis on the quant GRE. But in most cases, like I said, unless you do really badly or really well, making it past threshold, and really what we're looking at is like, after you kind of like pass through that gate, how do you basically, what is your fit in terms of your research interests and your skills?
Yeah, I see. And so for my situation, I think I have many research experiences and also have some publications as co-first authors, but my GPA and my graduate university is not that famous and wow. And so maybe for recommendations, the connection is not that strong. People don't recognize my supervisors or so on. So I, because previously I also have applied for a PhD and failed to get the fully funded offers. So for this year, I'm wondering if I should have a higher GRE scores to get attention for that. Yeah.
It won't hurt. I would say the other strategy, you know, and you may have a little bit of a head start on this since you did apply last year. That can be someplace where it can be very helpful to start reaching out to the people who would potentially be your mentors, and see if they are, you know, like if they seem interested after you send them that initial email. You can follow up and ask them if they might be willing to do a Zoom interview with you. So because then sometimes like they can advocate for you to the admissions committee. So like, you know, I know like both of my graduate students now, you know, when we were in the run up to the applications process, I probably met with like 20 people over Zoom. And then when the admissions committee came out, you know, like with, you know, their recommendations, I said, hey, like, you know, here are the people that I think, you know, I met with these people. I think they would be a really good fit with my lab. Like I was able to put in a good word for them. And so that might be something to help with you. Yeah, so I would say, you know, like if you since you've already kind of laid the groundwork and you kind of know the people and the programs that you're interested in, that might be a strategy to work on that.
Okay, I see. And I also want to ask about the balance between supervisors and the committee. Yeah, because I heard about that sometimes maybe the committee have final decision powers about the admission of students, and sometimes maybe the supervisor have
Yep.
greater power.
That's
Yeah,
going to
so
vary across different programs. So at Michigan, it is mostly the admissions committee, because it's funded by the, like we have a lot of slots that are funded by the department. And the advantage of that is that then like it sort of gives you more freedom as a student to work with multiple advisors or to change labs. Whereas other programs, you're funded directly by the person who's leading your lab. And so since they're, you know, their lab is the one putting up the money, they get a bigger say.
mm,
I will say I've been on an admissions committee before. And typically if the professor, you know, is like really excited about you, they've talked to you before, then they put in a good word with us. We do take that into consideration pretty heavily.
wow, I see. So my research interests mainly focus on human memories with EEG studies. And recently I'm studying the relationship between sleep and memory. And so I have visited the website of some faculties, but I'm not sure whether they did human studies only, or maybe they will be more focusing on computational neuroscience or um, experiments on rats or mice.
So you should be able to tell that to some degree from their publications. And it sounds like you're currently
Yes.
working in a research lab. Is that correct? So I would talk to the person who is your mentor in the research lab, and ask them for their suggestions. Because they may also know, like, oh yeah, my friend at this university, they're looking for a student this year, and I think you would be a great fit. Or, oh yeah, you know, like I just went to this conference or I just read to this paper, you know, from this person, and I think they're doing exactly the kind of stuff that you would want to be doing. So particularly if you are like in the position where you're thinking that the research you're doing now is pretty closely related to the work that you want to do in graduate school, that's actually a huge advantage, because your faculty member now can help sort of plug you into their network, and also, you know, just even just tell you the names of people you should be looking at.
Oh, yeah, this is one of the way I am recently considering, but I just feel that I'm afraid of like rejections because it might though so recently I'm doing an experiment and it is all designed by me and I wrote all of the scripts. However, our lab have never do something similar, so I want to ask suggestions from one of the collaborators of my boss. And then these persons have some co-authored publications that is very interesting. And the corresponding author of this paper is someone that I want to contact, but it just seems that it is too indirect and I'm not sure if I am inquiring about these issues. Should I mention both the experimental design issues and the PhD application inquiries together, or should I mention one and then another?
I think you can certainly slide it in there. So, you know, first of all, I would give you, you know, your current PI would give them a heads up that you're going to contact their collaborator. But I think you can, you know, you can sort of say, hey, you know, I'm really like, this is the experimental question. And then I don't think it hurts at all to put a line at the end to say, like, by the way, I'm thinking of applying to graduate schools this fall. I would actually be really interested in knowing if your lab has any openings, and if so, like, would it be possible for us to set up a Zoom and just talk a little bit about this sometime?
Oh, will it
And
be
yeah, and they'll either tell,
besides
and
that?
yeah, so just, you know, put it in, like, ask them the question. They're already going to be interested in your email because you guys are talking about the research that they're involved in, and then slide that in at the end, and they'll either tell you, yes, that would be great, or they may say, like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm not taking students this year, but either way you will know.
Oh, so is it polite that I request a Zoom meeting at the first email?
I would probably, like, the first email, I would probably just ask first if they're accepting students. Right? Because we don't, like, most of us will not take new students every single year. We usually take new students like every 2 or 3 years. And so you want to make sure that you're kind of like hitting at the right spot in their cycle.
Yeah, but I did have some research questions.
Yeah. So you know, go ahead and ask them the research questions. And then just, you know, at the end of the email, put that inquiry and just say, hey, you know, I'm applying to graduate schools. I'd be really interested in the possibility of your lab. Are you taking students this year? And they will either tell
Okay,
you yes or no.
okay. I can just be brave.
Yes, you can.
Okay, I see. Thank you. Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
Good luck.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.